Hi, I'm John, your host, and welcome to Heart of Care, a podcast by AMCU. Here, we delve into the real voices of healthcare, sharing stories of resilience, humanity, and the unwavering heart that drives it all. Join us as we empathize, learn, support, and even find moments to laugh together. Thanks for being here.
The Heart of Care. Season 2, Episode 3. Jab, No Jab, What We Owe to Each Other. Welcome to The Heart of Care, the podcast that explores the human side of health. I'm John, your host.
And I'm Laura. Today, we're stepping into one of the most fraught territories in modern medicine. It's a space where science, fear, political policy, and personal belief all collide, often right on the GP's doorstep. We're talking about vaccines.
But this isn't just a story about immunization. It's a story about trust and what happens when it breaks down. We're joined by Dr. Sophia, a GP who has been on the front lines of this very conflict, witnessing firsthand how public health policy and personal anxiety can create immense pressure. Sophia, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, John. I'm grateful to be here. This is a conversation that goes to the core of our profession. It touches on ethics, burnout, professional resilience, and how we hold the line for our patients, even when it costs us.
Sophia, you shared a story with us that perfectly captures this tension. It's a powerful example that I think will resonate with many of our listeners, both inside and outside of healthcare. Can you take us to that day?
Of course. It happened on an ordinary weekday morning. A man I'd never met before walked into my consulting room. No introductions, no small talk. He just stood in front of my desk and said, "I need a vaccine exemption letter for my child. Today."
Right out of the gate, no preamble.
None at all. I invited him to sit down to create some sense of calm, but he refused. He just stood there, arms crossed. His posture was rigid, defensive. It felt less like a consultation and more like a confrontation from the very first second. I tried to understand the situation, so I asked about his child and why he felt an exemption was necessary. He told me his child had developed a fever after a vaccine roughly 18 months ago. He said they went to the hospital and the child was observed and discharged the next day. When I asked for more clinical details, what the diagnosis was, what the doctors had said, he couldn't recall. There was no mention of a seizure, no anaphylaxis, no severe adverse event, just a fever, and a lot of fear that had clearly lingered.
So, a common and usually benign post-vaccination reaction. But what stood out to you was the timing. He'd waited a year and a half to address this?
That's exactly what struck me as odd. If the fear was so profound, you would expect some action sooner. There had been no prior request for an exemption, no follow-up with a specialist to investigate the reaction, no existing documentation in the child's file to suggest an ongoing concern. He only came to see me now.
And that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Why now?
When I gently asked him that, the entire encounter pivoted. He looked me straight in the eye and said plainly, "Centrelink cut my payment."
Wow. So this wasn't really about a medical event that happened 18 months ago?
That one sentence changed everything. The conversation was no longer about a past medical concern. It was about a present financial crisis. A government policy deadline, the no jab, no pay policy, had turned into a personal emergency. And suddenly, in his eyes, I was the gatekeeper he had to get through to fix it. I was no longer a doctor. I was a bureaucratic obstacle.
So the request for a medical exemption wasn't actually about the child's immediate health. It was about using the medical system to solve a problem created by the welfare system.
Precisely. And I sympathized with his stress. I really did. So I tried to find a middle ground. I offered to help him investigate it properly. I said, let's retrieve the hospital records from that day. Let's see what the emergency doctors wrote. I can arrange a referral to a pediatric immunologist to get an expert opinion. I made it clear, if a valid medical reason for an exemption exists, I will absolutely support it.
But he wasn't interested in a process. He wanted a product, a letter, immediately.
That must put you in such a tight corner. Ethically, as a doctor, but also just as a human being trying to de-escalate a tense situation.
It's an impossible position. I took a breath and told him, I understand this is incredibly stressful for you and your family, but my primary duty is to your child's health and safety, not to Centrelink compliance. I cannot and will not write a false exemption. It would be unethical and unprofessional. He exploded. The shouting started. He swore at me, called me a disgrace, accused me of betraying my oath to do no harm. His final act was to demand my business card, which he snatched from my hand. Then he stormed out, leaving the door wide open.
And the encounter didn't end there. Then came the fallout.
No, it didn't. Weeks later, I received a formal complaint forwarded from the medical board. He had lodged a complaint with the Health Care Complaints Commission, accusing me of refusing emergency care, even though his child was never present in the room. The stress was immense. I had to compile documents, write detailed statements, and relive that hostile encounter over and over in my mind and on paper. It was months of anxiety, all for doing what was clinically and ethically correct.
Sophia, reflecting on that consultation, it sounds like a perfect storm of mismatched ideas, hidden concerns, and clashing expectations. You tried to engage with his stated reason, then his underlying fear, and offer solutions. Can you walk us through that internal process a bit more? What were you trying to address in that moment?
You've hit on the core of it, Laura. As GPs, we're taught to explore a patient's ideas, concerns, and expectations. What they think is going on, what they're worried about, and what they hope to get out of the visit. In this case, the patient's initial idea was about a past fever, and his expectation was a quick exemption letter. My initial approach was to address that. Okay, tell me about the fever. Let's see what the medical history says. I was looking for a medical concern to justify his medical idea.
But then, when you asked why now, his main concern surfaced: the Centrelink payment.
Exactly. His true concern was financial, not primarily medical. When he said his payments were cut, his idea of the fever transformed from a medical event to a bureaucratic obstacle to be circumvented. At that point, my role shifted in his eyes from doctor to gatekeeper. And while I could sympathize with his stress, I couldn't align with his expectation for a false exemption. My pledge to care for his child meant upholding medical ethics, not signing off on something that wasn't medically valid.
So, his personal right to refuse immunization, as he might have seen it, clashed head-on with your professional pledge to care for the child's safety and public health.
Precisely. He was acting on his personal belief and immediate financial pressure. I was acting on my professional oath, which dictates that I provide evidence-based care and protect the well-being of the child who ultimately remains vulnerable without appropriate immunization. It's a very common tension now. We respect a patient's right to make choices, but we cannot facilitate choices that compromise medical integrity or harm a child.
Sophia, how did you feel in that moment when you opened that official letter? The one saying you were being investigated?
Honestly, I felt hollow. My hands were shaking. I remember sitting there and thinking about all my years of training. You enter this profession believing that if you act with integrity, protect your patient, and follow the evidence-based guidelines, you'll be protected. But in that moment, I felt completely exposed and alone. The system I was trying to uphold felt like it was turning on me.
And this is the paradox, isn't it? Your supervisors, the Royal Australian College of GPs, they all teach you to do exactly what you did. Stand firm under pressure. Don't be coerced. Protect the patient above all else.
Yes, exactly. They taught us the clinical and ethical framework. But what they didn't, and perhaps couldn't, prepare us for was the sheer vitriol, the abuse, the threats, the character assassination online, and most importantly, the institutional silence that often follows when you report these incidents. We're given the rules, but not the armor.
You were taught how to treat illness, but not how to endure hostility.
That's it perfectly. We're trained to deal with clinical uncertainty, but not this kind of moral burnout. Not the feeling that doing the right thing makes you a target. When the pressure to act comes from a policy deadline instead of a genuine medical need, the entire doctor-patient relationship becomes distorted.
Let's zoom out on that policy point for a moment. Policies like no jab, no pay are designed with a clear public health goal: increase vaccination rates. But you're saying there's an unintended consequence.
A huge one. These policies have placed GPs in a very strange and conflicting role. We are simultaneously a healthcare provider and a de facto compliance enforcer for a government agency. When a family loses thousands of dollars in benefits, their anger and desperation aren't directed at the policymakers in Canberra. It's directed at the person in front of them, the GP who won't sign the form. I didn't design the policy. I'm just trying to uphold my medical ethics and protect the child.
That's the heart of the conflict, isn't it? The mistrust of a large, faceless system gets redirected and personalized onto the healthcare worker in the room.
Exactly. The therapeutic relationship is the first casualty.
Let's shift gears slightly to how you navigate these conversations with patients who are genuinely fearful, not financially motivated. You've often used a great analogy with them, about vaccines being like training manuals.
Yes, I find it helps remove some of the scary, abstract jargon. I tell people to think of their immune system as a highly advanced but inexperienced army. A virus or bacterium is an invading force. An infection is all-out war. Without any preparation, your army has to fight blindly. There will be immense damage, collateral damage to your own body. Even if you ultimately survive the battle, it can leave permanent scars, long-term organ damage, chronic conditions. A vaccine, I explain, is a strategy guide. It's the enemy's playbook. It gives your army a detailed manual on how to recognize the invader, how to build the right weapons against it, and how to neutralize it quickly and efficiently. When the real invader shows up, there's no war, just a swift, targeted special ops mission. The battle is won before it even begins.
And yet, as a society, we seem to have become more scared of the training manual than the war itself.
Because we've forgotten the horror of the war. We live in the profound peace that vaccines created. We don't see wards full of iron lungs from polio, or children blinded by measles, or cemeteries filled with infants who died from whooping cough. Vaccines worked so well that they made the diseases they prevent seem like distant historical threats. So now, people question their necessity. We've become victims of our own success.
And that vacuum of experience is fertile ground for misinformation. From the thoroughly debunked vaccines cause autism claim to wilder theories about microchips. How, as a doctor, do you even begin to respond to that?
With a deep breath. With honesty, patience, and context. You can't just throw data at fear. It doesn't work. For some people, there's a genuine fear of corporate manipulation. And we have to acknowledge that pharmaceutical companies have acted unethically in the past. We can't pretend they're saints, but we can also explain that vaccine development and safety monitoring is one of the most intensely scrutinized and regulated processes in all of medicine, precisely because the stakes are so high.
That reminds me, I actually ran a small, informal experiment a few years ago. I was so frustrated by what I was seeing online. I created 2 Facebook pages. One was a pro-health advocacy page, sharing information from the World Health Organization and local health authorities. The other was a fake anti-vax page, which I populated with all the usual tropes and memes. Guess which one survived longer?
I have a sinking feeling I know the answer.
The anti-vax page. It got shared, boosted, and even recommended by Facebook's own algorithms because it generated so much engagement. Meanwhile, my pro-health page was repeatedly flagged for violating community standards, I suspect by anti-vax groups, and Facebook shut it down within a week.
That says everything, doesn't it? And it speaks to a very difficult reality. Facebook's community standards are designed ostensibly to keep the platform safe and prevent harmful content. They have policies against hate speech, bullying, and significantly, misinformation, especially about health and vaccines. However, the enforcement is complex and often flawed.
So, in theory, your pro-health page should have been fine, and the anti-vax page should have been flagged. But the opposite happened.
Exactly. The algorithms that govern our information ecosystem are not designed to favor truth. They are designed to favor engagement. Outrage, fear, and conspiracy theories often generate intense engagement. Likes, shares, comments, arguments, because they're emotionally charged and often presented as hidden truths. This engagement signals to the algorithm that the content is popular and should be shown to more people.
So even if anti-vax content should violate community standards on misinformation, the way it's presented makes it thrive by the platform's engagement metrics?
That's often the case. While Facebook has stated policies against vaccine misinformation and claims to remove millions of pieces of content, the sheer volume of new content, the use of coded language or emojis to bypass detection, and the rapid sharing within echo chambers make it a constant game of whack-a-mole. Additionally, human moderation is imperfect, and sometimes legitimate educational content can be flagged if it's reported by a coordinated group or if it touches on sensitive topics that trigger automated filters. An anti-vax group actively reporting a pro-health page for misinformation could easily lead to its removal, even if the claims are baseless. Meanwhile, their own content, even if it contains misinformation, might slip through or be harder to detect due to its nature.
It highlights how the very architecture of these platforms can inadvertently work against public health. It's not about sound science. It's about monetizing engagement. And that has made the job of public health infinitely harder. Let's talk about a specific example of that. Ivermectin. That became a huge point of tension during the COVID-19 pandemic.
It did. And it was a case study in how a sliver of preliminary science can be distorted into a dangerous ideology. Ivermectin is a very effective anti-parasitic drug. Some early in vitro studies, meaning in a petri dish in a lab, showed it could inhibit the replication of viruses, including SARS-CoV-2. But the doses required in those lab settings were enormous, far beyond what is safe or achievable in the human body. Despite this, the idea took hold online. People began demanding it. We had patients coming in with printouts from fringe websites. Worse, some were self-medicating with veterinary formulations, horse paste, and getting seriously ill. As doctors, we were pressured constantly to prescribe it, despite the complete lack of credible evidence from human trials.
That must have been surreal. Having to push back against this tidal wave of demand for something you know doesn't work and could be harmful.
It was exhausting. It felt like the ground had shifted under our feet. The shared reality of evidence-based medicine was gone. I remember one man leaning over my desk, his voice low and intense, and saying, "Doctor, if you don't give it to me, I'll find someone who will." That wasn't a consultation. That was coercion.
And this pressure, this rejection of scientific consensus isn't entirely new. We saw a tragic large-scale version of this in South Africa with HIV denialism.
Yes, that's a crucial and devastating historical parallel. In the early 2000s, under President Thabo Mbeki, the South African government actively questioned the scientific consensus that HIV causes AIDS. They flirted with fringe theories and, as a result, delayed the rollout of life-saving antiretroviral treatments to their people. A Harvard study later estimated that over 300,000 preventable deaths occurred because of that policy. That is the real-world cost. That is what happens when ideology replaces evidence. The cost is counted in human lives.
And still, even with examples like that, you hear people say, "Well, it's my personal choice." Or, "I'll believe HIV causes AIDS when I can see it kill a cell myself under a microscope."
And that's a fair point for an adult, isn't it? An adult certainly has the right to make choices about their own body, even if those choices aren't medically advised.
Absolutely, John. We all agree that a competent adult has the fundamental right to refuse medical treatment or interventions for themselves. That's a cornerstone of patient autonomy. My concern, and I believe our shared concern, arises when that choice is made for someone else.
Specifically for a child who doesn't have a voice.
Precisely. When parents, often with the best intentions, but sometimes based on misinformation or fear, make decisions that go against established public health guidelines for their child, it creates a very different ethical landscape. A child can't consent. They can't weigh the risks of a disease they've never seen against the perceived risks of a vaccine.
So, while we defend the right to refuse for oneself, we need to be much more careful and perhaps even step in when that choice impacts a vulnerable individual who cannot advocate for themselves. The balance shifts dramatically.
It shifts entirely. Our pledge to care for a child often means acting in their best interest, particularly when their own voice is absent. It's about protecting the defenseless. But the entire foundation of modern medicine isn't built on individual, personal observation. It's built on collective knowledge, on the accumulated work of thousands of researchers across decades of studies involving millions of patient outcomes. Trust in medicine isn't blind faith. It's a rational belief based on the overwhelming weight of evidence, gathered and scrutinized by a global community.
Which brings us beautifully to the concept of herd immunity.
Yes, if vaccines are a personal training manual, then herd immunity is the shield that a well-trained army creates to protect the entire nation. It's this incredible, selfless social contract. It protects the vulnerable among us who can't be vaccinated, the newborn baby who is too young, the chemotherapy patient whose immune system is wiped out, the elderly person whose immune response is fading. Your vaccination is not just about you. It's an act of community care. Herd immunity is love in action.
So after everything you've been through, the confrontation, the formal complaint, the daily grind of misinformation, how do we begin to rebuild that trust? How do we fix this?
It's the work of a generation, I think, and it happens one conversation at a time. It starts with humility, with presence, with listening. We need to stop seeing people with doubts as the enemy and start seeing their fear. Their anger so often masks a deep sense of powerlessness. So we acknowledge the fear first. We find common ground. We both want what's best for your child. Let's work on this together. We provide information, not just data. And we have to stay grounded when people lash out and not take it personally, which is the hardest part. Because their anger is rarely about you. It's about the systems they feel have failed them. And for us as doctors, we need better institutional support. We need systems that protect us when we face this kind of harassment so that doing the right thing doesn't lead to professional burnout and moral injury.
It seems that, in the end, it all comes back to relationship.
Always. That is the heart of care. Care is not just writing a script or giving a needle. It's integrity under pressure. It's showing up for people with compassion and steadfastness, even and especially when they try to push you away.
Dr. Sophia, thank you. Thank you for your work, for your courage, and for your incredible compassion.
This was The Heart of Care, Episode 3. Jab, no jab, what we owe to each other. We'll have links to resources and support for healthcare professionals on our website.
I'm Laura.
And I'm John.
And I'm Sophia. Thanks for listening.
Bye for now, till next time. Thanks for tuning in to this episode from AMCU Media, where real stories, healthcare, and advocacy come together. We release a new episode on the 28th of every month. We're a small, independent team doing our best to bring you meaningful conversations. And your support means the world to us. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and Facebook page. Just search for AMCU Media. Got a story or topic to share? Email us at amcu@strmedical.com.au. Together, we can do better. For care, for community, and for change. Until next time, thank you. And take care.